All right, let's jump right in. We're going to take a trip back to the mid-1960s. This was a time when everything was changing. A generation was questioning pretty much all the rules. And their music, well, it got seriously weird, incredibly creative, and started to sound like nothing anyone had ever heard before. We are, of course, talking about psychedelic rock.
This is really the core of the whole movement. Musicians at the time weren't just trying to write catchy tunes anymore. No way. They were trying to build entire worlds with sound, to capture feelings and ideas that just didn't fit inside a typical 3-minute pop song. So, first things first, before we get into the how, we really need to get a handle on what this new kind of rock was all about.
You gotta remember, pop music before this was mostly about, love, cars, dancing, that kind of thing. Psychedelic rock came along and asked, hey, what if a song could feel like you're exploring your own consciousness? Or what if it could sound like a journey to another planet? This was music that was meant to be a deep, immersive experience, not just something you'd have on in the background.
Okay, so if you want to make music that sounds like a dream, how do you even do that? You can't just pick up a guitar and play the same old chords. These musicians had to invent a whole new way of making sound. So let's break down the different ingredients they were working with. Now, the bands were using instruments that everyone recognized, guitars, drums, organs. But, and this is the key, the way they used them was completely revolutionary. They were pushing these instruments to their absolute limits, trying to squeeze out every strange new noise they could possibly make. This was basically their sonic toolbox. The electric guitar wasn't just for catchy riffs, it became this tool for painting with sound. They'd use distortion to make it sound huge and fuzzy, or a wah-wah pedal to make it sound like it was literally talking. Organs weren't for church, they created these swirling hypnotic backdrops. They even brought in instruments from all over the world, like the Indian sitar, which gave the music this really cool mystical vibe. The bass guitar started playing its own complex melodies, and the drums were drenched in echo, so they sounded massive, like they were recorded at the bottom of a canyon. As cool as all that was, the biggest, most mind-blowing changes were happening behind the scenes. See, musicians and producers started to realize that the recording studio wasn't just a place to capture a performance. It could be an instrument itself. They started messing with the recordings in ways that nobody had ever really tried before. They'd record a sound onto magnetic tape, literally cut the tape with scissors, and then glue it into a circle to create a repeating pattern, which is pretty much the original version of what a producer on a laptop does today with a digital loop. Or they'd record a guitar solo and then just flip the tape over and play it backward, creating these bizarre, alien-sounding melodies. And if you had stereo headphones, they'd use a technique called panning to make sounds feel like they were flying from your left ear all the way to your right. And just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of all this music was loud. The equipment was enormous. A single guitar amplifier back then could weigh more than 80 pounds. They needed that kind of raw power to create a sound that wasn't just something you heard, it was something you physically felt. Now, what's really fascinating is that this musical explosion didn't just happen in one spot. It kind of erupted at the same time in 2 major cities, and each place developed its own unique flavor of the sound. So over in Great Britain, you had bands like the Beatles and the early Pink Floyd. Their music was often really intricate and well-structured, almost like they were telling these strange, whimsical, fairy tale-like stories with their songs. But then you hop across the Atlantic to San Francisco, and you've got bands like the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane. Their sound was way louder, a lot more aggressive, and it was all built around a completely different approach to playing live music. And that's the key difference right there, especially in San Francisco, the jam session. A song that was maybe 3 minutes long on the album could stretch out into a 20-minute epic on stage. The band would just improvise, feeding off each other's energy, taking the music in totally new directions every night. It meant that no 2 shows were ever the same. You absolutely had to be there to experience that one-of-a-kind moment. And that brings us to a really important point. Psychedelic rock was never just about the music. The whole idea was to create a complete environment, a world you could see and feel just as much as you could hear. And that was the mission right there. The goal was to overwhelm the eyes just as much as the ears. They wanted to build this total sensory experience, where the visuals were every bit as experimental and mind-bending as the sounds. So how'd they pull that off? Well, at the concerts, they had these amazing liquid light shows, projecting blobs of colored oil and water onto the bands, making it look like a living, breathing painting. The posters for the shows used these vibrating neon colors and letters that looked like they were melting.
album covers stopped being just a picture of the band and became these incredibly detailed works of art. And the lyrics themselves shifted from simple rhymes to full-on poetry about dreams, philosophy, and weird worlds, inspired by books like Alice in Wonderland.
And the biggest stage for this whole sensory overload was, without a doubt, the music festival. Huge events like the Monterey Pop Festival and, of course, Woodstock brought hundreds of thousands of people together to share in this culture. Honestly, pretty much every big outdoor music festival we go to today owes its existence to these giant, groundbreaking gatherings from the 60s.
So, okay, this all happened a long, long time ago. Why are we still talking about it? Well, it's because the shockwaves from this short but incredibly creative era never really went away. That spirit of experimentation, all those sonic tricks they invented back then, they created these echoes that we can still hear all over the place in modern music and art. Seriously, you can hear these influences everywhere. Tons of modern indie and alternative bands use the exact same fuzzy guitar effects and weird studio tricks. Those hypnotic, repetitive beats in a lot of electronic dance music, you can trace those right back to the early experiments with tape loops. And the whole idea that an album cover should be a real piece of art that you can stare at for hours, that comes directly from this time.
But I think the biggest change of all was this. Before psychedelic rock, a pop song was just a song. Afterwards, a song could be a journey. It could be a story. It could be a really complex piece of art. It just blew the doors wide open on what we thought popular music could even do.
So, after all that, if there's just one thing you should remember from this whole explainer, what is it?
I think it's this. More than any one sound or any specific studio trick, the real legacy of psychedelic rock was the idea that there are no rules. It gave artists permission to be as weird, as creative, and as ambitious as they could possibly imagine. It was, quite simply, permission to explore. And that spirit of exploration, it didn't just stop in 1969. It's still going on right now, all around us. Which kind of makes you wonder, with all the crazy technology and new ideas we have today, what unimaginable sounds are waiting just around the corner? What's the next generation of musicians going to decide to explore?